NBA reporter for the Washington Post, one of the preeminent NBA reporters in the U.S., talking about all things NBA. Ben, thanks so much for making time, and welcome back to the program.
It's my pleasure, Paul. Great to hear your voice. I hope all is well. Let's rock.
Let's rock. We got a lot to talk about. Let's start at 30,000 feet. I've got a lot of questions for you, but let's go right up into the sky and talk about the NBA season so far. It's been an interesting year with some narratives that I think are worthy of a bit of a deep dive. One of them, of course, being the discussion about some sagging viewership. But talk about the Eastern. Let's start with the Eastern Conference. Is it what you've expected so far? And, of course, we'll dive into the West in just a moment. But tell us about what you see in the East as we're, a third of the way, well over a third of the way into the season now.
Well, what's so fascinating about the East is coming into the season, it was sort of like, Celtics versus the world. They're in this title defense looking like they have the best chance to go back-to-back of any team really in years. I mean, we've seen a whole bunch of different champions, a lot of parity at the top over these last 5 years, really ever since Kevin Durant and Steph Curry teamed up in Golden State. Every year it's been a different champion. So this was the year we thought, well, hey, maybe Boston, because they've got such an expensive roster, such a loaded roster, so many star players, they've got a great defense, obviously, a coach who really proved his mettle in last year's playoffs, and they've got this offense which is really pushing the boundaries of the three-point shot. They're taking more three-pointers than anybody in history by a lot, and they have a bunch of great three-point shooters. So this seemed like a formula that would say, well, maybe they could be a juggernaut. Maybe they could be a team that runs away with the conference. And lo and behold, they're 6 losses back right now in the standings behind the Cleveland Cavaliers, who they beat in last year's playoffs. And so it's been a real nice, unexpected twist to have Cleveland come out of the gate so hot, have them playing with such great ball movement, such great pace. It's a little bit of a small market versus big market story. Going back to the LeBron James days, there was obviously a rivalry there between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Boston Celtics, too. So I think that's really where the intrigue has been in the East. The other factor that we've seen, not very many star trades have worked out very well in recent years in the NBA. Bradley Beal to the Phoenix Suns hasn't really worked out. Paul George to the Philadelphia 76ers hasn't really worked out. But one that has worked out brilliantly was Karl Anthony Towns to the New York Knicks. He's fit into that group. They have such an amazing spaced-out offense. Maybe they could, stand to have a little bit of a deeper bench. Maybe they could improve their defense a little bit. But they've been living up to expectations as one of the best teams in the conference as well. So to me, that's sort of state of play in the Eastern Conference. You've also got Giannis and the Bucks looming as always. But to me, I think it's probably going to come down to one of those 3 teams. And I think anybody who's sleeping on Cleveland, who thinks, well, maybe they're too young, maybe they haven't done it before. They have Donovan Mitchell as their leader, but maybe he's not really an MVP caliber player, so maybe they can't win a title. I think that's baloney. I think this is a real legit contender-type team, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I look forward to seeing where they could take this.
Well, I think that's a great point because, like you said, when they came out of the gate so hot, they being the Cavaliers, people thought this just isn't going to last. This is just one of those bumps that teams occasionally, they hit a roll. They start out on a roll. Cleveland's maintained that role, and I think for good reason. This is a very good basketball team, and I like the points that you made, Ben, about their ball movement, which all too often in today's NBA is not nearly as important in the offensive schematics as it needs to be. And Cleveland, I think, is demonstrating the benefits of good ball movement with good players. But 2 things I'd love your comment on. Garland as Mitchell's running mate in the backcourt and the effects of Mobley and his improvement and growth on this Cavalier team and their success.
Well, both those guys have been much better than last season. Garland just inexplicably had a horrible down year last year and was one of those years that was so bad you started to worry like, oh, well, this guy was like a very high lottery pick. Like, oh, this guy came out of the gate, was pretty good during his rookie contract. We thought he was going to take off. What's going on? And so you're wondering, well, maybe he can't fit with Mitchell. Maybe he's going to have to get a trade and leave town. I mean, there was all this kind of speculation last summer. I mean, he was dealing with a lot of injury issues last year, and I think that was the primary driver of his struggles because he's really turned it back around this season. He's to me, an improved distributor in terms of how he's able to keep that ball rolling. And he's been just such a great fit with their new coach, Kenny Atkinson. Kenny Atkinson comes over from the Golden State Warriors. He also coached the Nets back in the day. And his whole thing is, like, it's not about one guy and a supporting cast. It's all about the group. That's, like, his approach, right? And so he wants to make sure Garland is empowered as a scorer, but also is making sure to keep all their shooters involved. And they just have a ton of shooters on that team. The list goes on. Max Strus, and you could just go right down their roster, all these different guys who can hit three-pointers. And Garland's been great at being unselfish and keeping those guys involved. Now, Mobley, when he came out, he was viewed, from college at USC, he was viewed as a potential defensive player of the year, and he's lived up to that. He's kind of in that Anthony Davis or Jaren Jackson mold of a big, versatile defender, a guy who can block shots, but also step out and play on the perimeter. He's starting to come along a little bit on offense. They're finding ways to use him as kind of a counterpunch. When teams get stretched out too much defensively, he can go back to the rim. He can drive a little bit and get you some paint points, and they can put some pressure on the glass, which is helpful. And he's also trying to experiment a little bit with being a secondary facilitator and also a three-point shooter. So those are some of the layers he's added to his game. To me, he's still a work in progress. He's not the smoothest guy. I like to joke sometimes he looks like he needs an oil change, right? Like he's just not quite as fluid as a player, even like a Jared Jackson. Or you look at Wemby, Wemby is just such a naturally gifted athlete, and there's just a little bit of clunkiness to Evan Mobley's offensive game. But sometimes it doesn't matter if it's pretty. It just matters if it works. And what he does is gives them 5 offensive threats on the court at all times. Between him and Allen, both those guys can make your defense pay if you're not, paying them attention. You're not keeping them out of the paint. And so that's really what helps Cleveland's balance. Every night somebody else can beat you, and those teams are really dangerous. And I want to step back and make one point about the Cavaliers, which I can't prove it yet because it hasn't happened. But what we're seeing in the NBA right now, it's a little bit of a shift away from super teams. We're not seeing what we saw with, like, the Golden State Warriors with Steph Curry and Kevin Durant I mentioned earlier, or the Heatles with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. What's winning right now in the NBA, it's balance, deep teams who have a lot of guys who can score. It's teams that have stars, but not necessarily the very best stars, right? Like you look at Oklahoma City in the West, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is incredible, but you look around his team, Jalen Williams is the next best player, and he's sort of a fringe all-star. A similar thing in Cleveland. You could make a case for 3 of their guys as all-stars, but they don't really have a top 10 player on that roster. A similar thing going on in Memphis with John Morant kind of in and out of the lineup with injury. They have a lot of good players, but not great players. And so I think some of this is being driven by how the salary cap works now, where you can't just go out there and buy stars and put them together on the same team. I think culture has never been more important. Having a winning culture, a hard-playing culture, a culture that says if everybody's shooting threes, that means it's going to be really hard to play defense. So we need to have a whole bunch of guys who want to play defense together. And then I think youth is also winning too. You look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, you look at the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Memphis Grizzlies, you got a lot of young legs on those teams. And so when people tell me, Cleveland's too young to really win a championship, or Oklahoma City's too young to win a championship, I just don't buy it, because I have really seen a strong change in style in terms of what wins in the NBA right now. And I think a lot of these teams that are winning during the regular season this year, once they get into the playoffs, they're going to keep winning in the playoffs because, three-pointers are still more valuable. Pace is still very important. Sure, the game is going to slow down a little bit. It always does. But I think that we've entered this kind of new era coming out of the pandemic where so much of it's about generating three-pointers and stopping three-pointers. And to do that, you got to have ball movement and you got to have a lot of young legs to run around and play defense.
Geez, that's a great summary. And I'd like before we jump to the Western Conference, I want to focus on a small point in what you just stated about how the NBA is functioning now. I was talking with someone, and they were saying to me, like, who's going to be the next LeBron? Who's going to be that new guy that comes in? And, we can talk about Wemby, and we can talk about people that can fill those gaps. But when you look at the three players at the top of the pyramid right now, Antetokounmpo, Jokic, and Gilgeous-Alexander, all three, as incredibly good as they are, have a mid-range element to their game. In an interior and a mid-range element to the game. And as you're talking about, like the Boston Celtics, shooting record numbers of three-pointers, the heavy emphasis on the three in the league, and the willingness of teams to take open threes or not even open threes quickly into the possession, and that goes to your point about pace. But don't you feel, or do you feel, that the overlooking of the mid-range element to the game, both in terms of who the players are and how they're developing their game, and that goes back to my point of who's going to be the next star, like Gilgeous-Alexander and Kawhi Leonard before all of the injury problems, players like that with a great mid-range game, Ben, just are so, next to impossible to guard, especially if they can shoot the three when they have that. It's the guys that are three and layups that are, I think, kind of taking away the identity of individualism in the players. Man, I really rambled on this point, but I'll bring it back.
No,
but you see where I'm going? You see where I'm going with it? It's like it's become so extreme, and the analytics nerds in the back room have, I think, really, completely. I'm going to use the term poison because I'm really old, but I'm old school, but I'm looking at it and going, man, it can't just be layups, free throws, and threes, if you're going to be successful, but, for the long term. And I think that ties into some of what you're describing about players, about teams rather, with a bunch of good players, but not necessarily a couple of superstars.
Well, I on the idea of shot selection and where you're going to get your points from. So, first of all, I think it's very important to acknowledge that the analytics was correct to a certain degree. Like, three is worth more than two. If you create threes consistently, you're probably going to have better offenses. And in the modern NBA, if you can't make threes as a team, if you can't generate them, you're probably not going to be able to keep up. You're probably not going to go deep in the playoffs. So that has to be a tool in your bag. But Absolutely. What you're saying is more about player development. You're saying, hey, you don't want to teach young guys that the only shots they could take are layups or threes, because that's ignoring a whole bunch of ways to score. And with that, I agree with you 100%. And I think what we're actually seeing in this modern era, the most valuable shots are going to be at the rim and they're going to be out on the three-point arc. But defenses are smart, too. Defenses adapt, right? And they're going to try to take away those things. So let's use Giannis as an example. What did all the defenses do in the playoffs against Giannis? Because he wants to do nothing but dunk all over you at the rim. Well, they come up with the wall strategy where they put two or three defenders at the rim and say, well, you're not going to score at the rim. Well, what are you going to do now? Well, when he's earlier in his career, he doesn't have the mid-range shot. He doesn't have the three-point shot. He's not a very good free throw shooter. He's stuck. Milwaukee starts going out of the playoffs early. A similar thing I would say actually with Jokic, right? When he's starting his career, he's this big-bodied center. Nobody really knows what to do with him. A lot of his stuff is coming out at the rim in the basket area because he got all these great flips and floaters and lefty layups and all this kind of stuff. Well, soon enough, you start to attract all that attention, and you realize you need to have a plan B and a plan C. And the very best players have the most plans, right? Shea can go all the way to the rim one-on-one and completely shake free from his defender, get a layup, but he can also stop on a dime, pull up, and hit that beautiful 15-foot jumper that I know gets you excited because it probably looks a little bit like Michael Jordan, right? He could also now he's added that step-back three to his game as well. He's still not a knockdown three-point shooter, but the threat of that shot starts to open up other opportunities for him driving to the basket, or it just forces teams to double or trap him where now he can make a pass to his teammate and Oklahoma City's offense can really thrive. So I think if we're looking at this, from a development standpoint, we want to tell young players, hey, these are the best shots, but work on everything, right? Because eventually you're going to reach a level where teams are going to be able to take away what you do best, and you're going to need to have a counter. And that goes for team offenses, too. The Houston Rockets were the most, stick-to-the-script team we've ever seen when they had James Harden, and it was all threes and all layups. And I think if they could go back and run the simulation, if Harden would have just taken some of the mid-range shots that teams were giving him that were wide open during some playoff series, he might have a championship ring now. I mean, it's very possible if they had a more diverse approach to their offense and shot selection, and they weren't quite so rigid in terms of what shots they were taking, he probably could have scored more easily. They probably could have won some series that they lost. And so, you could never run the history back. But that's why I worry about the Celtics, too, because they are very, very rigid with the threes. And last year they won the championship. Their formula worked. All those three-pointers paid off. But, it's a make or miss league, as everybody will tell you. If you go through a cold streak at the wrong time, you can get knocked out by a team that's not as good as you. And I think that's going to be one of the big things that we want to watch in this year's playoffs. Are there moments where the Celtics adjust? Or if the threes aren't going, do they just go down with the ship?
I think that's a great point, Ben. And you're listening to the Basketball Show on Sports 1440. I'm your host, Paul Sir, joined by the Washington Post NBA lead, Ben Golliver. I think that's a great point. Live and die by the sword is really the mantra that the Celtics carry forward and is more and more prevalent in the NBA today. But you cannot, in my opinion, take away the value of the mid-range game. And I also think, Ben, from my perspective, to a point you made earlier about a team like Oklahoma City having a legitimate shot at winning a championship, to me it's because they have that diversity in their game that a number of other teams don't have, and I think that could possibly really serve them well in the playoffs.
The Thunder are my favorite team to watch this year by a lot. They might be my favorite team to watch of the last 5 years. And it's funny because we could definitely gush about their offense, but what I want to do first is gush about their defense. I don't think I've ever seen an NBA team, play harder collectively defensively than the Thunder do, and it's because they've collected a lot of good individual defensive players who are all willing to sacrifice for each other. It reminds me of like an elite college team where you have one of those old school coaches where like the players are brainwashed and will just do whatever he says. That's how they play defense, and they cover for each other so well and so often. Just watch their games. Don't even watch what they do on the offensive end. Watch how many deflections they get, how many steals they get, how often they get out into transition because their defense has forced turnovers. They're pretty small right now because Chet Holmgren, their starting center, is injured. They usually only play one big at a time, but they gang rebound together, right? So they get out-rebounded in most games, but they certainly work hard at it. They box out like crazy. They've got a lot of length in terms of their perimeter players, so those guys can help out with some rebounds. And more than anything, they just work, and they crank it up in the second half consistently. You saw that against the Knicks in their comeback win a couple of days ago. You saw that again in their big win against the Celtics in the fourth quarter. The Celtics couldn't even score in the fourth quarter because Oklahoma City had cranked up their defense so high. So they are just such a treat to watch on that end. And I know a lot of people, when you were saying earlier about the ratings, and look, the NBA scoring has gotten out of control in the last 5 years. It's just up and up and up. But that does not mean there's no defense being played. There are some teams that have adjusted and have really put out elite defenses, and I would say Oklahoma City is at the top of the list. In terms of their offense, Shea is just, like, it's crazy. He could win MVP this year and still be underrated. I don't know when that's ever happened like that. It feels like it's almost impossible.
That seems like an oxymoron, but I get where you're going with it.
Right, but imagine if he was a Laker, right, or a Knick.
Oh, my God.
Imagine if he was playing in one of these big markets, how huge of a star he would be. And I'm sure he's huge up there for you guys in Canada, and he's starting to really grow here in the U.S. as well. But I think that he is still underappreciated, I guess is the word I would use for everything he does on offense. And they've just got a lot of good shooters around him, a lot of unselfish team-first players, and they are just very, very well coached. And that's what I like about their team, too. It's all about the focus of the group, right? And it starts with Mark Daigneault, who worked his way up from their G League team up into this head coaching position. When they hired him, nobody knew who he was, right? He was like a virtual unknown, and he's got a case as the best coach in the NBA for the last couple of years. It reminds me a lot of how Spoelstra made his rise in Miami. And if I was looking at USA basketball, by the way, you guys probably don't want to hear this because, I guess we're big rivals now. But when USA basketball starts looking for their next coach, I would look at Mark Daigneault because that guy knows how to put together a culture. He knows how to get guys to play hard. He's young. He relates to the players. He doesn't have to scream at them to get his point across. I think he's got a lot of the characteristics that you would want in a dream team type coach. Even though he's playing in Oklahoma City, he doesn't have the dream team headliners besides Shea.
Well, I think it's a great point, because once you get into the FIBA basketball world, it's a whole different set of dynamics that you could see even with the USA team this past summer in Paris. NBA players, especially American NBA players, do not adapt that easily to the FIBA game. It's just a very different game. By the way, people talk about fixing the NBA. If you ever want to fix the NBA, play a 48-minute FIBA game. I'd love to watch that with NBA players. I think that would be a really entertaining league. I'm going to go back to the East, to one other comment you made about the trade between the Timberwolves. As you know, Ben, I'm from the Midwest and lived for a long time in the Twin Cities. So, I've been one of those long-suffering fans who just, shake your head and, suffer from low self-esteem because of all of the bad moves they've made throughout their history. So they finally start seeming to get things going this past year. They make a trade. You can kind of understand, and you look at, trading the way they did for Randall and for DiVincenzo, and you go, this maybe should work out. They really shouldn't lose anything. Towns is kind of up and down, but man, oh man, Cat, for whatever reason, just the blend with Thibodeau, the blend with the teammates, the chemistry, so much in the NBA really is who you play with and play for that determines how good you are. But my God, has he thrived in New York.
And so much of it, it's so simplistic to say, but a lot of it is just spacing, right? Cat has these huge numbers in New York because they don't have anybody else in the paint. They play this great 5-out style. Everybody's got room to operate. They've got a lot of skilled offensive players, and they just kind of go nuts, right? It's not like it's open gym, but it kind of feels like that sometimes because, they're just a very difficult team to defend. And when you look at Minnesota, of course they sacrifice spacing with that trade. And what do we hear from Anthony Edwards? It's complaints after almost every single game about how he's getting double teamed, about how they don't quite have the offensive rhythm, how maybe they need somebody else to kind of like initiate, kind of be a table setter for that group. And it really boils down to Karl Anthony Towns can shoot threes and he has gravity and it opens up the paint. And a player like Julius Randle can't really shoot threes, doesn't have the gravity, and always wants to do all of his scoring kind of, going towards the basket on tough shots, spin moves in traffic, and that kind of thing. So that trade has really backfired on Minnesota. I think if I was the Timberwolves, I would be trying to trade Randle as hard as possible prior to the deadline because he just doesn't fit. If he's going to work somewhere, it's not going to be Minnesota. So I think that they need to try to do whatever they can to get some of that spacing back. Now, it could be a cheaper player. It doesn't have to be a star like Karl Anthony Towns, but you just need someone else who can go out there and consistently knock down threes and make life easier for Anthony Edwards because right now he's playing with McDaniels, Randall, and Gobert. None of those guys are hitting their shots. And Dante DiVincenzo, the other guy who came over in the trade, his shot quality is so much worse in Minnesota because the spacing is bad. He's not really hitting his threes either. I guarantee you if you traded Randall for some sort of spacing, you would get better production from Anthony Edwards. You would get better production from DiVincenzo. And even a guy like Gobert would have more room to operate in the paint. So we'll see if they can find anybody who's willing to take Randall on. But if I could have any player traded from any team in the NBA right now before the deadline, it would actually be Julius Randle because I enjoyed watching that Timberwolves playoff run. It was great up there in Minnesota for some of those playoff games where they're going against the Denver Nuggets and the Dallas Mavericks. And Luka hit a big shot on them up there in that building. Like, it was a tense, fun atmosphere. And this year it's just been a real whoopee cushion.
Yes, the Minnesota Timberwolves whoopee cushion. I think you've got a merchandising idea here that could fly in Minnesota. I'm talking with Ben Golliver from the Washington Post here on the Basketball Show on Sports 1440. Let's jump over to the Western Conference. You, of course, live in, unfortunately, fire-plagued Los Angeles, but you get a lot of chance to look at the Clippers, to look at the Lakers. But let's talk about the Western Conference this year. If I could use the circus term topsy-turvy, I think I'd be able to almost pull it off, as corny as it is. But the Western Conference, in my mind, Ben, has not been what what I thought it was going to be at the beginning of the year. It's really taken on a different form in terms of who the best teams are. And that's not to say that the quality of the Western Conference has gone down. I think it's still very, very high. It's just, it's a bunch of new teams.
Well, there's definitely some new blood. You got the Grizzlies back in there. You got the Spurs with Wembanyama kind of getting themselves into the mix. You've got a Houston Rockets team really playing above its head. It's another example, by the way, of one of those teams with depth and defense and togetherness that I was talking about earlier, rather than like high-end star power. That's really been winning a lot during this regular season. So I'd really say all those teams are pleasant surprises so far. I think the other big storyline, though, it's got to be the older guys coming off of the Olympic gold medal, Steph, LeBron, and KD, all coming back to earth a little bit, right? And the Lakers have had some moments here and there recently, but they really can't win on the road. They don't have the consistency. LeBron has looked old at times this season. There's been whispers and rumors like, would this be the last year? Maybe next year's is going to be his last year. So that kind of talk has really started to pick up during the season for the first time that I can really remember down here. The Warriors are just average. They're just not that good of a team. They don't have a ton of talent. They went through a cost-cutting cycle over the summer, and it's really showing with their product on the court. And the Suns, talk about topsy-turvy, to use your term. 8-1 to start the season. I'm thinking, well, maybe Kevin Durant's finally going to have another shot in the playoffs. Have they even won a game since? It feels like they've been on like a 2-month losing streak. Now they're maybe trying to trade Bradley Beal for Jimmy Butler and getting even more desperate. It's really been a mess down there in Phoenix. So I would say all those teams in their own ways, the Lakers, Warriors, and Suns, have been the victims of some of the pleasant surprise teams that we were talking about a minute ago.